In today's video, I'm going to go over the best settings on the Sony FX30 to get the most optical image quality. I've been using this camera for over 5 months now, and I have really enjoyed using it. I just put out a Sony FX30 review. If you haven't seen it, I'll put a link in the description below, but that was the biggest question I've been getting about this camera. So let's start off with the color profile. So when it comes to color profile that I use, if I'm going to color grade the footage myself, or I'm going to hand it off to an editor, a colorist, whoever it may be that has the ability to color the footage, I'm going to film in S-Log3 Cine. Now, if I'm doing real estate work or any type of talking head, pretty much any work that I'm going to toss it off to a client and they're going to not want to have to color grade it, I'm going to then shoot in S-Cinetone, which is a variation of S-Log3, but it's made to have a really great looking image out of the camera. Now, the third color profile I use, which I actually don't have to change to, is when I do live streaming. When I do live streaming, especially out of the USB-C port, once you choose live streaming, the camera automatically chooses a Rec 709 profile. So whenever I'm doing live streaming, I stick with Rec 709 because you're trying to just get an immediate image out of the camera. And the Rec 709 profile for live streaming is great because we're also not live streaming in 4K. We're live streaming in 1080p most of the time. So for that, Rec 709 works great. Let's talk about ISOs. Now, most of the time I shoot in S-Log3. The best ISOs to shoot in S-Log3 are 800 and 2500. When I first got the camera, in order to force myself to shoot in the best ISOs for image quality, I shot in Cine EI mode because it forces you to shoot at 800 or 2500. However, there are some situations where you just can't shoot at 800 or 2500. May it be you don't have an ND filter and you need to shoot lower than 800, or maybe you need to shoot higher than 2500 in a lower light condition. Well, then that's where flexible ISO comes in handy, and that's actually what I film in most of the time now because I can't always stick to ISO 2500 in lower light conditions. Now, when it comes to lit conditions, I try to stick to 800 all of the time, and then I just add an ND filter like I'm doing right now. When I shoot in S-Cinetone, the base ISOs aren't the same, and so for the most part, I'm not shooting in low light in S-Cinetone, I'm shooting in lit conditions, so I stick to ISO 200. Don't really know what the science is behind why the native ISOs are different for the different modes, but that's kind of the gist of S-Cinetone. So if you're shooting in S-Cinetone, stick with 200, but if you're shooting in S-Log3, stick with 800 or 2500. By the way, if you're getting knowledge and value out of today's video, make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with more videos like this. Now let's talk about shutter speed. This is probably going to be obvious for some, less obvious for others, but I always try to stick to the 180-degree shutter rule, which means you're shooting double your frame rate. So right now I'm shooting this at 24 frames per second, which means my shutter speed is 1/50th. That's the closest I can get to double my frame rate. Occasionally, you're not going to be able to stick to it. For instance, I've had issues before where I've had TVs that just flicker way too much, even at the 180-degree shutter, where I've had to shoot at a faster or lower shutter speed. If you want to have the best looking images with the most realistic motion blur, then try to stick to the 180-degree rule. Sometimes I have to shoot at 1/30th of a second in order to get rid of flicker from TVs, lights, or whatever. Me personally, I always notice in the movement of hands, whatever, if there's any movement in the shot, you'll notice it more on 1/30th, where if you can shoot a little bit of a higher shutter speed, although you'll end up getting sharper motion blur, you won't be able to see the motion blur as much. It ends up being a little bit more realistic than shooting slower. Now let's talk about exposure tools. When I'm on the go and I'm trying to move really quickly, for exposure tools for the most part, I just use the EV and I stick to 1.7/0. It's kind of been an unwritten rule in Sony cameras to always stick to 1.7, and I didn't really understand it until I got the FX30, and it seems to work really well for me, especially when I'm on the go and I don't have time to look at a bunch of different exposure tools like histogram, false color, whatever it may be. Sticking to the EV has actually really helped me just move very quickly. So that's my little secret. Try to stick to 1.7/0. And that's pretty much it for my settings on the FX30. For the most part, stick in S-Log3 unless I'm handing off the footage to a client, and then it's S-Cinetone. Stick to ISO 800 or 2500 in S-Log3. Stick to 200 if you're shooting in S-Cinetone. I stick to the 180-degree rule, and the little cheat code to stick to 1.7 over the normal exposure value to get the best quality images out of this camera. I hope I was able to answer your questions on how I get the best image quality out of the Sony FX30. If you have any questions, make sure to put them in the comments below, and if you got knowledge and value out of today's video, make sure sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell to keep up to date with the latest videos from the channel. Until next time, my name is Geoff Fagien. Thank you for watching, everybody, and I will see you in the next video.